He was standing over me watching me sleep. He was holding a large kitchen knife. People who've almost died because of a psychopath, what's your story? I guess this doesn't really count as almost died, but it was an unsettling moment nonetheless. In high school I started dating this new girl, we'll call her Nicole. She had mentioned that she was somewhat recently out of a relationship and that her ex might be a problem as he wouldn't leave her alone, we'll call him Rory. She was dreading getting all her stuff back from him because she didn't even want to see him. Our typical routine after a few weeks of dating was to finish school, jump in my car, head to her place and hang out until her parents got home. It was the usual sex first and then a lot of TV watching, mostly MTV. So one day we're watching MTV and there's a knock at her door. She opens the door and it's Rory, and he's very angry. Turns out he had seen my car there for about a week and figured it was a new guy, so he waited outside her house to confirm and then busted us hanging out. Things got heated between them pretty fast with Rory yelling and screaming the standard "nobody will love you like I did. How could you? We promised each other forever." Now, I noticed from where I was sitting that Rory was a little guy. Someone I could easily take in a fight. I decided it was better to not even approach the situation as I didn't want to have to get involved. After Rory screamed for what felt like 10 minutes, enough was enough and I went over and asked him to leave. He told me he'd kill me, and Nicole said, "Rory, you're acting crazy," and without missing a beat he put his hands on his hips and said, "You want to see crazy? This is crazy," and proceeded to pee himself right in front of us. Neither of us knew what to do. This guy was just peeing his pants like it was a crime against us. Nicole slammed the door shut and Rory walked off. Or so we thought. About 30 minutes later we hear fire trucks and there's a smashing knock at her door. It's the fire department. The big oak tree right in front of her house is burning up like crazy. Like, full-on inferno. It was amazing the house didn't catch fire and even more amazing that we hadn't noticed anything. There was smoke everywhere but not in the house. Rory was already in the back of a police car. Turns out he brought all of her stuff that he still had with him, and after we shut the door he climbed the tree and put all her stuff on different branches, climbed down, and set the tree on fire. The guy was off his meds or something. That was a crazy day. Someone kidnapped me, that I was trying to escape from that I'd been in a relationship with. He found me outside of a night class and convinced me to get in a car, started driving fast and took me to an isolated area, kept driving all night telling me all the ways he could kill me. He drove onto train tracks and sat there, said he would kill us that way. Drove at high speeds on the highway and rural area, making close calls, threatening to drive off cliffs, into guardrails, body of water. I let him take me home where he locked me in his room and I pretended like I loved him and had sex with him. He finally left the house and locked me in, but I escaped and I messed things up. Told his family. I found all this stuff while I was locked in his room. He had copies of my personal info and all my family that he'd made when he'd come to my home. When I was locked in, I found a number of his old girlfriend, and called him from a phone in the room. I found crazy lists of the two of us comparing everything about us. It was insane. Including gifts for Christmas that were the same, birthday. All sorts of weird lists. I expect he is a serial killer now. I was around 17 at the time. We had a 2-story house that had an in-law apartment. Upstairs was ours. Downstairs was half garage half apartment, that we would rent out. The tenant had a daughter that wasn't quite right in the head, and she hated me. I have no idea why. I never said anything to her, but she didn't like me one bit. If she ever saw me she would run inside and blast music so loud, I learned the words to the songs. There was a staircase that led from the upstairs where I lived, into the garage where there was a sink, washer and dryer that the tenants could use. One day I started down the stairs and suddenly slipped and grabbed the arm rail to save myself. There was liquid soap all over the stairs. I told my ma, who asked the tenant about it and told her if it wasn't for the arm rail I would have slid down the stairs. Turns out the daughter did it. Hold on, I'm not done yet. A week or so goes by and I head down the stairs and the stairs are soapy again, this time mixed with some water to make it even more slippy. I'm ready this time and grab onto the rail, but wouldn't you know it, she soap up the rail this time. In a world without friction I slid down the stairs at Mach 3 and at the end of the stairs is a nice soft wall of concrete. I managed to tuck my head in a way so that my back took most of the hit. Still whacked my head enough to lose some brain cells. I wouldn't have made good use of them anyway. This time my ma was upset about the whole thing and they only stayed there for another month or two and moved out. My ex thought it would be funny to suffocate me with a pillow, or to choke me till I passed out. At the end of the relationship I woke up in the ICU of a hospital after he tried to kill me by poisoning me. He told everyone that I did it myself and they believed him. I truly believe he is a sociopath. He also tried to kill my cat, probably did, since I never saw my cat again. I used to keep rat poison in my house. One day I started having pain in my stomach. Doctor said it was IBS. I suffered from this pain for years and was always thirsty. My wife and I divorced, the pain stopped completely a month later after we split, and my thirst died down. I also discovered my rat poison box was nearly empty. Do the math. Wish I could have proven what she did to me. She is the type that likes to get attention or sympathy by any means necessary. She was having an affair with someone. After reviewing all the events that transpired, all of it led to that she was poisoning me. It fell in line roughly around the time she met this guy. But after we divorced, and the pain stops? Yes, she was doing something. If it was IBS or something, it would have been ongoing even after, but to just stop after we divorced, raises eyebrows. Sadly, none of this would stand in court. It is my word against hers, and the courts reasonably want hard proof. Hospital records, police reports, etc. Since we have a child together, if I tried to go after her with this, it would probably look bad on me, like I am trying to start trouble, and our judge is pro-family, and granted me with 50-50 custody. No child support or alimony. I don't want to risk that. If I knew what I knew now, I would have done something like get tested for poison and started recording her when I was at work to get evidence the courts would have needed. My ex-boyfriend basically choked me out 3 times in a row. He was on top of me and I was lying down face first on the bed. Literally choking me unconscious again as soon as I woke up. No matter how much I tried to scratch or bite at him, he would not loosen grip. He had my neck between his elbow and was pulling with his other hand, this all while having sex with me anally. We would have fights where he would grab me by the hair and say, "What should I do? Kill you?" Another was when he made a glance at a knife and then at me before trying to tackle my phone out of my hand. Luckily I called 999 just in time. I can safely say this guy was psychotic. The only way I escaped was by overdosing intentionally and having him call an ambulance. The doctors figured something was wrong and had to have him escorted out of the hospital. I knew what it took in order to not actually die, although I really felt that was it for me. He now cannot contact me or visit the country or he gets jail time. In a car with my ex-girlfriend, she was driving like a maniac. Literally going like 80 miles per hour in a 40 miles per hour zone, running red lights without even looking, straight up not caring. I had to yell at her to stop a lot of times before she came to her senses. Her excuse was that she didn't notice what she was doing. She was later diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. One of the symptoms for this condition is a feeling of dissociation, which sort of makes you feel like you're not in control of yourself. Woke up in the middle of the night as my psychopath stepson was standing over me watching me sleep. He was holding a large kitchen knife. He was institutionalized a few days later. He was in treatment since he was 3. And he went to the hospital that morning. He was 8. They admitted him, he was there 3 days, before being institutionalized, into a residential facility. So when I said he was institutionalized, a few days later, I was referring to his residential facility, not the hospital, which was immediate. It's a tough road for him for sure. Mental illness is horrible. Sadly, after his mom and I divorced, she moved out of state, and took him, of course, with her, and never got him back in treatment. He's 20 now, and destroying people around him regularly. He has a baby, who he does not support or see, under a year old, and I just spoke to his mom today. She's remarried, and we've always stayed friends, and he has another girl pregnant. He's never had a job for more than a few days, barely reads, was passed through high school, just to move him out of the school. Super sad. So, my apartment is in the shape of a U, and the carport is in the back, forming an O essentially. We had these neighbors who attracted bad energy, even though the matriarch was a sweetheart. She let a friend live with her for a few months, and her friend had a boyfriend who was diagnosed sociopathic. At one point he even threatened to shoot up her whole apartment because of this woman. Police were called, did nothing. If it did happen, we had a man who lived on the top edge of one side of the U who was a gun enthusiast, so guy would have gotten knocked out real quick. Anyway, there was a huge fight with him and his girlfriend at about 10 p.m, it was loud, but he left. 2 a.m. we get a loud knock saying one of the cars in the carport was on fire. It was spreading very fast. This idiot caught our carport on fire, in the attempt to make it spread to the apartments and lock us all in the O of the building. Everyone got out safe even though the entire row of cars were destroyed. The thing is, if we didn't have that one night owl neighbor, who just so happened to be outside at that moment, the fire would have spread without anyone knowing because it was quiet. And only one person called it in. Scariest day of my life. They know who the guy was, but they couldn't prove it. Guy threatens 25 plus people, some of which were literal newborns and elderly people, and attempts to kill them, and he doesn't get charged. It was messed up. This isn't as near death as some of the stories here, but it's still the most frightening night of my life. My parents had a bitter, volatile and violent divorce. My mom went absolutely off the rails during this time. It was no secret to anyone, I was a trap baby, and while my parents were married, my mother never attempted to bond with me or form any relationship whatsoever, while I was the apple of my dad's eye. It had always been him and I. He was a single parent even while they were married. So when they got divorced, I chose to live with my dad. He got primary custody while my mom got weekends and whatever else he would give her, and in turn he never asked for child support. During and after the divorce, she was awful to me, berated and insulted me, trash-talked my dad any chance she got, and let her abusive, alcoholic and completely inappropriate boyfriend, Saturday night and with the family at her house, meant he'd turn the lights off, light candles, and lie down while me and my stepsisters were required to give him a massage, essentially move in with her. Now that the stage is set, one weekend she came to pick me up for her custodial time. I'd begged my dad to let me stay and not make me go, but he told me it was court-ordered and I had to. When she picked me up, the first words out of her mouth, with as much venom as she could spit to an 8-year-old, "You don't look very excited to see me. I wanted to stay with Dad. You're not very nice to me." Something in her snapped. She spent the next 30 minutes shrieking at me while driving 90 miles per hour down a 2-lane country highway known for its deadly accidents. She screamed up and down that she was just going to kill herself and drive her car off a cliff. I was in hysterics because I was also in the car, and her response was, "Guess you'll go with me." It was the longest 30 minutes of my life. I was begging her to not kill me, not kill herself, and just take us home. Eventually she calmed down like nothing ever happened and took me to her house. After that I never showed any unwillingness to go to her house because in my elementary schooler mind she would kill herself and me if I did. I never said anything to my dad because she said if I did she'd hang herself. I turned 30 this month and haven't talked to her in 2 of the best years of my life. This wasn't even my worst memory of her, and she still has no idea why I cut contact with her. As a kid growing up, I had a neighbor who had some issues. She was my age, about 10 years old when this happened. She had invited me and one of her friends to come over and swim. Her family had one of those hot tubs with the pullover covers. We had been playing in the hot tub with half the cover still on. She told me one of our toys had floated under the cover and asked me to look for it. As I looked for it, she climbed out of the hot tub and pulled the rest of the cover over me, shutting it. I started to panic. There was very little room between the water and cover. I started trying to push the cover up, but it wouldn't budge, so I started screaming. Luckily her dad was walking by and heard me. He opened the latch to the cover. I believed that it could have been an accident, until she killed the family dog in the same fashion about a week later. When I was in foster care, I was drowned and resuscitated twice. The kids I lived with were evil. They would hold my face down in ant piles and stuff. It was pretty awful. Luckily I got out when my grandparents found us. In the 5th grade, I was attacked and my head bashed with a rock by an 8th grader. They were starting a gang and that was initiation. I managed to escape and ran into the nurse's office covered in blood. I ended up living with my aunt and uncle in middle school, and my uncle locked me in the garage with his truck running. I managed to open the back window, like the middle slide window, and open the garage door from the clicker. My aunt didn't believe that it was on purpose, but she did chew him out for it. There were plenty of other occurrences. For my senior trip in high school, we worked our butts off to get it approved. We basically made it a community service trip, but it was a big milestone for our small private school. There was this girl I'm going to call A, and she literally tried to push me off a cliff. I don't know how I knew she was going to do that, but I moved just in time and caught her arm and was like, "Yo, chill, you're crazy." And then she said, "I wanted you to fall," and then I told the others to watch out for her. Then later that night she attacked me. I still to this day have zero clue why. We all got sent home early and it ruined any future prospects of a senior trip. Then in college I had a gun pulled on me as an RA. In my head I said, well, I'm dead. But he didn't shoot me, luckily. I wouldn't let him in the building to see his girlfriend. He put it down and laughed and drove off. Almost forgot. Some dude literally tried to run me over in his truck and absolutely totaled my bike. I was just out getting some warm-up exercise before going to soccer, And then I jumped off my bike and barely got missed. He just drove off too. I'm a lucky guy. When I was 16 I worked at Safeway bagging groceries. One day while I was on my break, a drunk barely lucid homeless man wanders in to use a payphone. Most of what he's yelling over the phone is incoherent, but I'm able to make out. "I'm coming to pick up that stuff right now." He hangs up the phone, punches the wall, then leaves and I think nothing of it. As my shift ends a few hours later I'm sitting in the deli waiting for my mom to come pick me up, and in wanders drunk homeless guy again. He buys himself a fruit bowl, sits down a few tables away from me and then just blankly stares into space. He doesn't move for a couple of minutes and that made me extremely uncomfortable, so I got up to go wait outside for my mom. The second I get up and move my chair this guy starts freaking out, flips his table over, then freezes making direct eye contact with me. I don't know what to do so I just slowly start walking towards the door when he starts yelling. "Listen you little idiot, I killed my granddaughter, and I'll murder you too. I'll bury your body right next to hers in my backyard." This got security's attention and they held on to him until police arrived. I guess I didn't really almost die, but as a 16-year-old kid it was still pretty scary. I was in a car with my older brother and he was threatening to drive us into a telephone pole. He had issues with alcohol, wanted badly to drink but was conflicted about it, and he was catching a lot of hell from his partner and others. I don't know if he was psychotic per se or had actually been diagnosed as such, but it was absolutely close enough for jazz that day. I wasn't a driver, didn't have a license though I could drive in a pinch. Also my right hand was in a cast, broken from some earlier fight elsewhere that I don't remember now. I was in several knockdown dragouts in those days. I was no saint. I should have walked away but I was worried about him and asked for the keys. He attacked me, broke my hand. I defended myself as best I could, but ended up in jail for fighting in public. No matter what happens I end up in jail. I must have a villainous air about me or something. One of my worst episodes. My brother is dead now. He had a pretty bad life in a lot of ways. This memory can weigh on me at times. My last ex's mother hated me. She has an official diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder. Her children exist to serve her. She didn't like that I was able to convince my ex that his family situation was really toxic and he needed to get out. I have had suicidal thoughts and tendencies since I was about 12 and she tried to use this to her advantage. She used the internet to engage in a harassment campaign against me, using some of her other children to help her out. She was always sweet to my face, then she'd dig up my blog later and send me anonymous hate about my biggest insecurities, which eventually turned into disseminating my nudes, impersonating other people, generally really messing with my head and mental health. If I turned the option for anonymous messages off she'd just make throwaways, and if I turned messaging off completely or went dark, she'd make contact with known friends and acquaintances of mine to send them my nudes and other blackmail. I did end up hospitalized a few times. She may not have tried to murder me directly, but getting a very long diatribe about how disgusting my genitals are, and how my rapist must have thrown up on me afterward that swerved right into, "I bet you lie about being raped so people have pity sex with you because nobody else will ever want you anyway," was horrible for a traumatized 19-year-old. I fortunately was able to get rid of her by cutting romantic ties. My poor ex is not so fortunate. She did get into some legal trouble over all of this. I'm going to shorten this story a lot because to tell every little detail would take forever. Basically, my cousin, friend and I were in a cafe almost 4 years ago waiting for coffee. I was the oldest of the group and was 13 at the time. This guy who looked to be 16 or 17 was hitting on my 12-year-old cousin. He also had with him an emo little brother who was just standing around and being awkward, and his 40 or 50-something dad with a beer belly, neckbeard and greasy t-shirt and jeans was acting as his son's wingman. There's a place nearby where people go cliff jumping, and all three of them kept trying to convince us to go with them. It was storming massively and these creeps were trying to convince unsupervised children to go cliff jumping with them without telling anyone. Anyway, I took control of the situation. We were too polite to tell them to F off, so my friend ignored them entirely, while my cousin said that she couldn't remember her social media information and her phone had died. When he asked for it, her phone had died, and my friend had no reception, as this took place on a tiny island, so it was just me with a working cell phone. I gave him my Instagram, but didn't tell him how to spell my German last name, only quickly said it as we booked it out of there with our coffee. As the storm amped up we sat under a pavilion about a quarter of a mile down the road while we joked about the serial killers running around the island. When the rain cooled off a bit, we walked about halfway back to the coffee shop and were hanging out at the rec center. The building itself was locked up, so we were just chilling on the world's tiniest playground, which was surrounded by a 2-foot-high fence that had one gate. When we finished our coffees, I offered to bring the cups over to a trash can, which was right next to the shop. This was over an hour after our encounters with the strange trio. I walked up to the trash can and saw 3 guys standing outside the coffee shop. 2 of them, clearly the main creep and the emo brother, were facing away from me, while the dad was facing towards me. I wasn't sure if the dad saw me, but I wasn't taking any chances. I threw away the cups and jogged back to the playground, where I told my friend and cousin what had happened. We agreed to stay in the sheltered part of the playground so no one would see us. If these 3 guys came looking for 3 little girls, then it would be obvious that the dad was playing an active role, not just weirdly helping his socially awkward sons. As the rain continued to fall, we remained pretty quiet in the tiny little shelter. There wasn't a slide or anything in this 4x4 wooden box thing, so there was only one way out. Sure enough, the older son popped in through that entrance and blocked the way. He greeted us with a "Hey ladies," and then proceeded to demand to know why I had run away when I had seen them. Yep, the dad was encouraging this behavior. I told him I was conditioning for cross-country in the fall. That wasn't actually a lie, but no one conditions on a 100-foot flat piece of tar. He told me that he also runs cross-country, and if we went with him to the cliff jumping place, then he and I could run the trails. I knew the place he was talking about, and the trails were even more secluded, with even more dangerous places where accidents could happen than the cliff jumping area. I looked over at my cousin and friend. They were terrified and trying to back away, which wasn't really possible, given the small space. I knew that once again, my ability to spin lies from relative truths and make them believable meant that I had to take charge. In reality, I'm a terrible liar, but by taking the truth and changing something like a name or a spelling of a last name, it's a very easy, believable lie. That's my tip to any bad liars in bad situations, but I digress. Anyway, I told him that we had to go to my 16-year-old stepsister, Ashley's, birthday party, and that we had to go to the little convenience store across the street to get ice cream. I even faked a call with my mom where I confirmed that we were getting the ice cream and would be walking home soon. They actually seemed to believe this and moved to let us pass. When my dad called me, I kind of stared at my phone. I was an only child, and this was my biological dad calling me, probably asking if I wanted to be picked up. The guy could see the look on my face and blocked my cousin from leaving. It was at this time that I noticed that the dad and emo brother were blocking the gate with their blue minivan. They were standing just inside the gate and had the backseat door to the minivan slit open. They had bad intentions. If I told my dad this, then we would be abducted long before he could get to us. I had to go full in. Here's how the conversation went. Me: "Hi Dad." "Dad: Hi sweetie. Are you guys ready to get picked up yet?" My phone volume was low so the guy couldn't hear what my dad said. Me: "Yep. We are right across the street from store name, and are about to buy the ice." "Dad: The ice?" Me: "Yeah, for Ashley's birthday party. Is there anything else you need us to get?" "Dad: Who's Ashley?" Me: "Yeah, I can't believe that my big sister is turning 16 today." At this point my dad thought that we had bad connection or something, so he said goodbye and hung up. My friend pushed past the guy and we all hopped the fence, paying no mind to the emo brother or dad or minivan. Without saying anything, we crossed the street and headed into the little store away from the rain. We waited in the store for a good 45 minutes. It's a small island with a population of 200 people but an amazing tourist revenue. All the residents knew everyone else, which is definitely why my parents didn't come looking for us for all this time. I'm buddy-buddy with the store owner, so she didn't mind us chilling in there. Despite the rain being significantly worse, we set out once we thought we had put enough time between us and them. This presented us with 2 options. The ferries to the mainland weren't running, and the guys had mentioned they were tourists, so they were probably sulking in the main part of town or by the docks while waiting for the ferries to run again. If we took the 1.5-mile route, then we would go through a heavily trafficked area, but they would most certainly see us. If we took the 8-mile route, then it would be abandoned, but there's no way they would see us. Expecting to call my parents once all avenues of conversation had been exhausted, we agreed upon the 8-mile route. As we set out in the pouring rain, I noticed that the only car besides the owners at the store was a blue minivan. I didn't pay it any mind at the time. Once we were 2 miles into the journey and about half a mile from the nearest structure, which was a farmhouse owned by a family friend, my cousin noted that I was wearing a t-shirt with the name of the middle school my friend and I had just finished, And my friend was wearing a sweatshirt with the name of the high school we would attend in the fall. Despite going to school over 1,000 miles away, this still set a somber mood over everything. Then, a blue minivan, the same blue minivan, pulled up beside us. I told my cousin and friend to book it for the farmhouse and they vanished behind a huge bush 10 feet up the road. "Can I help you?" I asked nervously. "Ya girls need a ride?" the driver asked. It was the dad, wearing a cowboy hat and sunglasses and speaking in the fakest southern accent I had ever heard. He repeated himself several times and despite the semi-tint of the windows I noticed movement in the back. At this point he knew I knew it was up. As I continued to try to convince him that no, we didn't need a ride, I inched up the road, as he slowly rolled the car towards me and the back door was slowly being opened by the two inside. As we were talking I pulled out my wallet and chucked it into the woods by the side of the road. I needed to leave some trace of me behind. Knowing I couldn't outrun them, I assumed a fighting stance. I have 2 black belts. I've never been so scared in my life. What happened next is the only event in my life I consider to be any evidence of some higher power looking out for us. 7 people on motorcycles came riding down the road from the opposite direction. All 7 of them knew me and saw my cousin and friend hiding behind the bush. Between that, seeing me in a fighting stance and the minivan, they figured I was in trouble. They all stopped and started shouting my name, which caused the guy to speed off, never to be seen again. They waited with us while I called my mom and retrieved my wallet, and helped us explain to them what had happened once my parents arrived. 3 years later, my cousin texted my friend and me a news story. The 16 or 17-year-old who was the main antagonist of this whole fiasco had gone on a killing spree. He had murdered the dad, the emo brother, his girlfriend, his mom and the emo brother's girlfriend. In his confession he admitted to attempting to act on his urges years prior with a group of young pretty girls, but Pa wouldn't let me, but he ain't helped me neither. I know this isn't exactly the shortened version I said earlier, but it covers the main points. Thanks for listening to Radio TTS. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more videos like this. And please share your own psychopath stories in the comments below. Let us know if you have met a psychopath and if he was dangerous.